No coração impiedoso da fronteira, a figura de Jack emergiu como fantasma, trazendo consigo o peso do passado selado há 20 anos com um APACHE. O sol cru punha seu fogo amarelo sobre as terras áridas, e cada passo seu arrastava memórias enterradas sob a poeira espessa do deserto e o silêncio das noites frias. Depois de tanto tempo, aquele lugar ainda enchia seus olhos e alma com uma mistura amarga de saudade e medo contido. No horizonte se descortinava, em vastos campos secos, onde a vegetação rarefeita mal conseguia resistir ao sopro cortante do vento. Rochas ressecadas, troncos retorcidos de árvores esquecidas e o estalar distante de um corvo completavam a sinfonia silenciosa de um oeste que não perdoava os que ali buscassem refúgio, sem pagar o preço da dureza. Jack avançava com o rosto marcado pelas linhas do tempo, mãos calejadas, mas o coração tão jovem quanto naquela tarde há 2 décadas. Agora em seus 40 e poucos anos, Jack caminhava devagar, cada músculo pesado e cada respiração medida. O silêncio das planícies era um convite para reviver o segredo que o tinha moldado, um mistério que permanecia oculto entre ele e Nayeli, o guerreiro APACHE que Jack salvara quando menino. Não haviam palavras trocadas, nem promessas feitas, apenas um vínculo silencioso gravado na alma, tão forte quanto invisível ao mundo, que insistia em dividir homens por suas diferenças. Nos recantos da mente surgiam os ecos daquele dia fatal. O sangue do guerreiro a manchar o chão seco, seu olhar de dor e reconhecimento, o medo compartilhado diante das armas do inimigo. Jack sempre soube que aquele gesto alterara irremediavelmente o curso de suas vidas. A lealdade invisível entre eles era um segredo mantido com rigor, como se dissolver pudesse repetir a violência sofrida. Mas agora o tempo não trazia apenas recordações, ele carregava um aviso. Ao alcançar a antiga trilha, marcada pelas pegadas gastas de outrora, Jack estacou, sentindo o ar se compactar com uma presença nova e inquietante. Seus sentidos aguçados, treinados pela experiência e pelo instinto das terras selvagens, percorreram o espaço ao redor. O farfalhar da poeira naquela direção não era natural. Carregava o ritmo lento e calculado de um cavalo aproximando-se com um propósito sombrio. O coração apertou, lembrando que nem toda companhia trazia salvação. Cada partícula de terra levantada naquela trilha parecia anunciar a chegada do desconhecido, uma sombra silenciosa que se moldava ao vento, escondida sob um capuz pesado. Jet podia discernir uma aura de ameaça que o arrepiava desde a pele até os ossos, um prenúncio de que o passado que julgava enterrado agora ressurgia para cobrar sua dívida. Os olhos do homem experiente buscaram aquele vulto misterioso, intentando decifrar a intenção oculta atrás daquele semblante encoberto. Então, como se a poeira fosse um véu, ele o viu, o cavaleiro encapuzado. Aproximava-se devagar, quase sem fazer barulho, um espectro de silêncio e perigo. Seu rosto oculto abrigando uma promessa velada de tormenta. Jack sentiu o peso do olhar invisível como se fosse uma flecha apontada em seu peito. O momento congelou entre passado e presente, a fronteira entre a segurança e o perigo, a lembrança e a ameaça. O encontro estava marcado. O tempo dos segredos acabava de se esgotar. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. The rider's silhouette grew clearer against the dying light as Jack's eyes fixed on the ominous figure advancing with deliberate patience along the dusty trail. His heart, still stubbornly anchored in the past, tightened with unease. Who was this stranger, cloaked in shadow, carrying the weight of memories too dangerous to face? The faint glint of metal at the rider's hip caught Jack's peripheral vision, a silver object, polished by years, but unmistakably familiar. Jack took a slow, purposeful step forward, the rough gravel crunching beneath his boots, mirroring the unrest stirring inside. The air around the trail seemed thicker now, charged with an unspoken urgency, as if the earth itself held its breath. He strained his ears for any sound beyond the rhythmic tap of hooves, but the only response was the whispering wind weaving through the skeletal branches overhead. A storm of memories rumbled in his mind. The day of Niallie's near death, the boy who reached beyond the boundaries that divided them, and the fragile trust forged in silence. It was that reckless courage from decades past that had saved a life, yet now thrust Jack into a web of shadows he had hoped forever to avoid. As the stranger drew nearer, Jack's gaze locked onto the object that confirmed his suspicions, an insignia engraved with symbols reserved for their kind, a mark that only Niallie bore. His pulse quickened, a storm of questions pressing against his ribs. Why return now? What purpose drove this ghost from the past to cross the endless plains once more? Jack's mind flickered back to that youthful afternoon. The boy he had been, wide-eyed and trembling, had stumbled upon Niallie, bleeding and broken among the scorched earth. Fear was a constant companion then, a silent scream echoing beneath the open sky. Yet bravery had outweighed terror. Hands had steadied, whispers had promised survival in a world that demanded ruthless choices. That bond, as unspoken as the desert night, had tied their fates irrevocably. He pivoted his gaze, searching for a sign, any clue of the rider's intent beyond that emblem. The silence hung like a tightening noose. Jack faced the daunting truth. The past he had sealed away was cracking open. The stranger carried not just the insignia, but the weight of history, grudges buried beneath bloodied sands. The old path, once a thread weaving hope through desolation, now felt like a crossing into peril. Jack's breath caught, the desert heat suddenly oppressive. Time, that relentless hunter, was closing in. The rider's approach was steady but deliberate, a measured advance that bore the weight of an unyielding purpose. Jack's hands instinctively brushed the worn leather pouch at his side, the only remnant he carried of that fateful day, a token entrusted to him by Niallie, before the world fractured around them both. It was more than a keepsake. It was a tether to a friendship that the unforgiving frontier sought to erase. He moved cautiously now, each step a careful balance between readiness and restraint. His eyes never left the rider, gauging every nuance. The shift of the reins, the tilt of the head, the slow but steady rhythm of arrival. The stranger's silence was a language all its own, void of warmth, yet not without intent. Jack knew that this was no mere coincidence or random crossing of paths. The insignia was a summons, a key to a door long thought closed. The questions swirled with growing urgency. What message did the rider carry? What shadows from Nayeli's past demanded reckoning after all these years? Memories intertwined with present danger, clouding his judgment. As the desert bled into night, he remembered the whispered stories of rival factions, ancient wounds festering beneath a fragile peace. Had Nayeli's disappearance been a shield or a trap? And what was the price of uncovering truths some wanted to remain buried? The rider's horse shifted uneasily, nostrils flaring in the dry air, sensing the tension in the stillness. Jack's gaze caught the first sign of movement, a hand that brushed the saddle, fingers curling grimly around an unseen weapon beneath the cloak. A challenge veiled in shadow, poised to ignite old conflicts anew. For a moment, time fractured. The boy who had risked everything for a stranger was gone. In his place stood a man weighed down by decades of silence and regret. Yet beneath the steel of experience, the ember of that youthful courage still flickered fiercely. Jack tightened his grip on the leather pouch, feeling the rough edges bite into his palm, a reminder that some debts could not be escaped. The stranger finally spoke, voice low and gravelly, slicing through the heavy night air. 20 years and you still carry the past like a ghost on your back. Jack's jaw clenched. We can't run from what we've done, but sometimes the past is better left where it fell. The rider let out a humorless chuckle. That's why I'm here, to see if that's true. An uneasy silence fell again, thick and suffocating. Jack took a slow breath. The desert around him faded into the background, leaving only the cold certainty of what was to come. He squared his shoulders and met the rider's dark gaze. The path ahead was laden with shadows, secrets waiting to claw their way to the surface, bonds forced to prove their strength once more. And then, with deliberate calm, Jack's eyes caught the unmistakable flutter of a folded note tucked beneath the rider's coat, a threat concealed in plain sight, promising the unraveling of all Jack had fought to protect. The rider's horse stepped forward, hooves stirring the dust in slow circles around them, like the turning of a deadly wheel. Jack swallowed hard, the taste of old fears rising anew. The insignia isn't just a memory, the rider declared, voice heavy with warning. It's a claim, and it brings a reckoning. Jack's breath hitched, the weight of inevitability settling in. He knew without question that the past had come to meet him on this trail, and this time there would be no turning away. The stranger lifted a hand, motioning toward the horizon, where night swallowed the last remnants of day. What was saved back then, the rider murmured, now threatens to destroy everything you hold dear. Jack's eyes narrowed as the shadowed figure reined in his horse, lingering at the edge of the trail like a specter summoned by fate. The desert night swallowed their gazes, and a silent promise hung heavy between them. Tomorrow would bring answers, or hell. The rider began to turn away, the silver insignia glinting faintly once more, and Jack, heart pounding, was left alone on the trail, watching the dust settle on the ghost of a friendship that might never find peace. Jack's boots stirred the dusty earth as he stepped through the narrow settlement, where the echoes of ancient songs still lingered beneath cracked wood and faded paint. The flickering flames from campfires cast ghostly shadows on faces withered by time and hardship. The air was heavy with the scent of sage and smoke, mingling with the restless hum of quiet voices spoken in a language both foreign and revered. He had come seeking answers, but the welcoming was far from warm. Eyes, sharp and wary, followed his every move. Suspicion clung to Jack as tangibly as the grit on his skin. Among the small band of Apache elders and warriors, the guest was a riddle at best, a remembered stranger at worst. That tenuous thread of trust woven from old legends was nothing but fragile here. From the flickering firelight emerged Tana, her gaze steady, unyielding, as if she bore the weight of hidden truths in her poised silence. Her hands rested lightly on the worn handle of a tomahawk, a symbol of both protection and warning. Age had sharpened her instincts, and her eyes held stories that didn't need telling, secrets carved deep into her cautious heart. Jack approached her, each step deliberate, his voice rough when finally breaking the silence. "I'm looking for something that vanished long ago." Tana's eyes narrowed. "Long ago can mean many things here. What brings a man like you back to walk these paths?" He swallowed, feeling the weight of every word. "The rider, the one with the insignia. He carries pieces of a past I thought buried." Her lips pressed tightly, a shadow passing across her features. "Nayeli disappeared years back. Some say he was taken by the very shadows that haunt these lands." She hesitated. "You knew him well, more than most." Jack nodded slowly, the flame-light trembling in his gaze. "I owe him more than I can say. But now, this stranger hunts more than just old grudges. There's a reckoning coming." Tana studied him, then nodded, accepting unspoken truths. "The rider you speak of is no random ghost. He serves a rival faction, a bitter branch we fought long to keep at bay. His hate for Nayeli burns, but it will not stop at him. Anyone who helped Nayeli, any friend, will stand in his way." The settlement grew quiet again, as the crackle from the fire seemed to whisper of distant dangers. An unshakable air of threat caressed the bare skin of those gathered, weaving tension between past wounds and present fears. Jack let his gaze drift toward the horizon beyond the flickering lights, toward the barren stretches where once he and Nayeli had carved silent promises between survival and trust. The echoes of those days whispered like a wind through dry grass, fragile yet persistent. Tana's voice cut through his reverie. "If you want to find out who rides these lands with deadly intent, you will need help, and not just from me." Jack met her gaze, a flicker of hope breaking the stoic mask he wore. "I'm ready." She glanced at the others gathered by the fire, silent but watchful. "Then we will begin. But be warned, what you seek may unravel far more than just one man's disappearance. It could shake the very ground beneath your feet." Shadow shifted in the darkness beyond the flames. An unseen watcher, a silent order, sent forth under the blistering constellations. The land itself seemed to hold its breath with them, awaiting the storm that their paths would soon ignite. Jack felt the familiar knot tighten in his chest. Memories collided with the present, flickering images of a boy's desperate hands, Nayeli's fading strength, and the sacred token entrusted with trembling faith. The past was no longer a distant shore. It was a tempest rolling closer with every heartbeat. Taina spoke again, her voice low and mixing with the night wind. "You must be cautious. The rider's enemies are many, and their reach long." Jack's eyes flickered to the darkened trails stretching before them, the uncertain destination of a journey born from fear, loyalty, and hope. His fingers brushed the leather pouch at his waist, the rough edges biting into his skin, a reminder that some promises can never be broken. The moon climbed higher, casting pale light on their resolved faces. In the weight of silence that followed, the heavy certainty settled over Jack like a mantle. The shadows stalking these lands carried more than vengeance. They carried secrets meant to be buried. And secrets, like the unforgiving desert wind, have a way of resurfacing. Under the vast, indifferent sky, Jack and Taina exchanged one last guarded look, a pact forged from necessity, not trust. The thin line between ally and enemy blurred in the cold air. Their footsteps merged, fading into the vastness as they set forth to uncover the truth. Unbeknownst to them, a figure cloaked in darkness watched from a ridge, eyes glinting with cruel intent. The rider had not ventured alone. Allies waited in the shadows, ready to spring a fatal trap. As the night deepened, the whisper of horses' hooves echoed in the distance, a warning carried by the cold wind. The hunt had begun. A folded piece of parchment, faintly stained and marked with the same insignia, slipped silently from the rider's cloak and fluttered down into the dust, a silent threat left for Jack to find. Taina's voice cut through the night. "They won't stop until everything connected to Nayeli is destroyed." Jack picked up the note, his heart pounding with a cold certainty. The past was closing in with deadly resolve. And the next move belonged to them. The rider's shadow disappeared into the night, leaving behind a promise echoing in the fading stars. Old grudges run deep. Tomorrow, the true test would begin. Jack's steps were deliberate, though his heart thudded with uneasy rhythm as he and Taina moved. Through the shadowed outskirts of the region, the dusty horizon stretched wide and barren, a relentless tapestry of cracked earth and skeletal brush. Above, the sun dipped low, casting long fingers of amber light that recalled the fragile warmth of a trust forged 2 decades before. But beneath that fading glow, tension crackled like static, a warning whispered through the dry air. Taina didn't spare many words. Her gaze was sharp, trenchant, reflecting years of guarding ancient truths. "The rider hasn't given up," she said quietly, her voice like gravel and smoke. "He hunts with patience, never careless, always watching. We're marked." Jack tightened his grip on the leather pouch nestled beneath his coat, a relic Nayeli had entrusted to him on that fateful day, a sacred token humming with unspoken weight. He swallowed the lump in his throat that surfaced whenever memories rose unbidden. Nayeli's eyes, fierce yet distant as he whispered a fragile promise, almost lost to the crushing silence of war. In this delicate alliance between them, a fragile thread of hope was all Jack held, yet every rustle, every shifting shadow on the cracked path shattered the brittle calm. The rider's silhouette was etched in his mind like a looming storm. As night crept closer, the strange figure was seen at different vantage points. Sometimes perched atop a distant ridge, other times dissolving into the thinning fog behind scrub and twisted mesquite. Jack felt the icy fingers of dread curling in his spine, knowing each silent observation tightened the noose of an inevitable confrontation. "We move cautiously," Tana whispered, as they skirted a dried creek bed choked with dusty bones of forgotten creatures. "This land keeps its secrets well, so do the men riding with that." Shadow. Old grudges don't die when the gunsmoke fades. They wait. Jack nodded, his mind ensnared in the past, recalling that day young Jack, a boy trembling but undeterred, found Nayeli bleeding, the life seeping from him, yet eyes blazing with defiant fire. He had lifted the wounded warrior with trembling hands and fled under a sun that seemed to burn not just the land, but the fragile trust blossoming between them. That memory bore a secret few knew. Nayeli, before vanishing into exile's embrace, had pressed into Jack's palm a small, worn artifact, an emblem carved from bone, etched with symbols sacred to his people. "Hold this," Nayeli had said, voice barely a breath. "It carries more than memory. It carries hope." Jack looked down at his pouch, feeling the rough edges bite into his palm, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It was a living thing, choking the present. "You should rest," Tana said, her eyes narrowing toward the darkened hills ahead. But the rider will not wait for rest. They paused briefly, the silence amplifying the unspoken fears between them. Jack traced the imprint of dusty earth beneath his boot, his mind wrestling with the guilt that had haunted him for 20 years. Had his youthful bravery been a spark lighting a firestorm instead of saving a life? A sudden movement disturbed the brittle quiet. Branches snapped softly in the distance, the faintest crunch of hoofbeats weaving through the desert's breath. Jack's pulse surged, while Tana scanned the horizon with a warrior's alertness. In that chilled moment, Jack realized the rider's presence was no mere haunting. It was a calculated siege. "My past isn't an iron resolve." Tana's expression hardened. The rider is not alone. Men loyal to darker oaths ride with him, waiting for the right moment to strike. They want something you carry, a secret more dangerous than any bullet. Jack swallowed hard, his thoughts a maze of dread and resolve. "Why now?" he asked. "What could possibly drag the dead from their graves after all this time?" "Because some debts don't expire," Tana said sharply, "and some truths are poison to those who rule these lands." The sun fell behind jagged rocks, surrendering the landscape to shadows that bled into night's cold embrace. Jack's eyes caught a flicker. A shape dissolved into the distance, a whispered movement swallowing the trail behind. His breath caught as memories surged. the boy who risked everything for Nayeli, the warrior who vanished beneath the weight of impossible choices, the gift of kinship that now carried the burden of threat. They pressed forward, footsteps swallowed by the creeping dark. Without warning, Tana halted, her gaze fixed on a narrow canyon twisting ahead. "An ambush," she said grimly. "I've seen signs. The riders' men won't let us pass freely." Jack surveyed the rugged path, a thin scar through stone, the perfect trap for those wary yet desperate enough to walk it. "The time is shorter than we hoped," he admitted, eyes narrowing as they prepared to navigate the deadly passage. Jack's grip hardened on the pouch, its secret flame burning hotter in the looming storm. From the shadows behind the ridge, two figures detached themselves, faces obscured beneath wide-brimmed hats, bodies tense and ready. The rider was no longer just a ghost in the distance. His emissaries moved with lethal intent, and somewhere beyond sight, the encapuzado conversed in quiet, measured tones with these men, plans sealed by whispered threats and the brutal calculus of vengeance. Jack's jaw clenched. The web was tightening. A faint breeze stirred, carrying with it a chilling echo. The rider's shadow was not just watching anymore. It was striking. A single folded note dropped silently from beneath the rider's dark cloak, fluttering like a wounded bird onto the dust-choked earth. The symbol etched on its seal was unmistakable. Nayeli's insignia, a herald of doom. Jack stooped, fingers trembling as he unfolded the parchment. The words scrawled were a promise etched in blood and shadow. "Everything you built will burn unless you surrender the past." The fire in Jack's chest flared, mingling defiance with fear. Tana placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "This is just the beginning." The desert night deepened. Eyes burned with unyielding purpose watched from hidden vantage points. The final gambit was set. And ahead, the narrow trail twisted like a cord tightened to breaking, where allies could become prey, and secrets demanded to be reckoned with. A breath, a step, and the shadows closed in. The rider and his deadly men prepared their deadly game. Time was running out. The next move was theirs, if they survived to make it. The narrow path twisted ahead, hemmed in by jagged rocks that cast long, morose shadows, low and unwavering. The ambush is close. The rider's men know this land better than we do. They've laid the trap to catch more than just you. Her fingers flexed restlessly around the worn haft of her tomahawk, knuckles pale in the growing gloom. Jack's gaze narrowed on the canyon's mouth ahead, a serpentine cut through the stone where wild shadows pooled. The memory of that folded note stirred like a ghost beneath his ribs. The short promise that everything he'd built could be burned to ash if the past was not surrendered. He shifted the leather pouch beneath his coat, feeling the rough edges bite into his palm. Nayeli's gift, once a symbol of fragile hope, now a beacon attracting the dark forces trailing their steps. They pressed forward, senses taut like drawn bowstrings. The dry silence leaned in, broken only by the distant caw of a lone raven, its cry slicing through the chill gathering in the air. Tana's dark eyes flicked toward the shadows, catching a movement so slight it could have been the desert wind or a living threat. Without a word, Jack slowed, his heart hammering beneath the surface. The narrow passage funneled them into a trap, one that spoke of cold calculation and grievances festering for decades. Suddenly, a twig snapped sharply to their left. Jack whirled. Instinct flashed in his muscles, but there was nothing but dust trembling in the twilight. "They're here," Tana murmured. Her eyes sharpened like a hawk's, scanning the rimrock that crowned the canyon walls. From the gloom, two figures materialized, their forms cloaked against the encroaching night. Wide-brimmed hats shadowed their faces, but there was no mistaking the steady, silent menace that hung about them like a second skin. Each hand hovered near a gun butt, breath shallow and deliberate, patience honed by years of hunting prey. Jack felt the pulse of ancient fear rise, a coil tightening in his chest, not unlike the icy grip that had seized him 20 years before when first facing Nayeli's desperate gaze. The boy who had lived then was gone. The man now standing was forged by decades of loss and resolve. "Stand ready," Tana whispered, her stance a warrior's promise. As the two figures closed with measured steps, a low voice drifted from the canyon's further bend, a shadow detaching from the darkness where the rider waited. His cloak billowed briefly in the dry wind, the silver insignia catching the last rays of light like a herald of doom. Jack met the rider's gaze, cold, unwavering, a mirror reflecting all the storms of the past decades. Behind the rider, hushed words passed between unseen men, plans steeped in vengeance and the cold reckoning of blood debts were woven with cruel precision. The narrow passage tightened like a noose, the last sanctuary of safety dissolving beneath the weight of inevitability. Jack took a steadying breath, fingers tightening around the leather pouch once more. His mind traced back to Nayeli's fevered whisper on that bleak day. "Hold this. It carries more than memory. It carries hope." But hope was fragile. And now hope was on the line. As the ambush drew near, a sudden flutter disturbed the dust at Jack's feet, a small scrap of parchment settling like a fallen leaf. His heart seized as he bent to retrieve it, eyes scanning the sinister script, sealed with the mark he dared not forget. "Everything you built will burn unless you surrender the past." A chill crept along Jack's spine as the words soaked into his very bones. The rider's warning was no bluff. It was a promise carved from the darkest corners of history. Tanya's hand landed heavy, steadying on Jack's shoulder. Her voice was iron wrapped in calm. "They want to break you, to erase all that binds you to Nayeli." Jack met her gaze, the flicker of defiance igniting his weary soul. "Then we'll show them those bonds run deeper than their hatred." A gunshot cracked suddenly, shattering the stillness like thunder tearing through the quiet sky. Instinct sent them diving for cover. Rocks scraped skin, breath caught, hearts pounding the desperate rhythm of survival. Shadows erupted in motion, figures breaking cover, weapons drawn, eyes blazing with merciless intent. Amid the chaos, Jack's thoughts screamed for clarity. This was no mere hunt. It was a reckoning with every secret buried beneath. The scorched earth. Taina's voice hissed in his ear. They'll push you to the edge, but you must hold fast. The rider's reach is long, and his wrath deeper than you know. Jack's grip on the pouch grew ferocious, a talisman against oblivion, as he pushed off the rock, moving through the melee with fierce intent. The narrow canyon echoed with the clash of steel and the thunder of boots on stone. Dust swirled like ghosts, masking friend from foe. All around, the lines between past and present blurred in the deadly dance of survival. Then, a sudden stillness fell, a silent suspense frozen in the cavernous hollow. Jack found himself face to face with one of the attackers, the hatred in their eyes a reflection of his own buried fears and unspoken guilt. Breathless, he shook the weight of old memories loose, focusing on the now, the fight to protect the fragile peace still beating beneath his ribs. The skirmish ebbed slowly, the remaining foes pulling back into the shadows from which they'd emerged. Taina grimaced, but nodded. We escaped for now. Jack allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, eyes scanning the darkening path ahead. A winding trail littered with the remnants of battle and the heavy silence of fractured trust. The rider's shadow loomed relentlessly behind them, a storm gathering on the horizon. Jack unfolded the note again in his mind, the threat echoing louder with every heartbeat. The past was a wildfire now spreading beyond control. The only certainty was that the deadly game had just begun, and somewhere out there, hidden in the desert's vast embrace, the mysterious rider prepared the next move, a dark promise waiting to be fulfilled. Jack's breath came in measured bursts as he stood before Nayeli, the years etched harshly on the warrior's weathered face. The scars that marred Nayeli's skin told tales darker than spoken words ever could. Tales of exile, betrayal, and a relentless chase beneath the merciless sun. The friend he had saved as a boy was no longer the proud figure of his past, but a shadow forged by pain and haunted secrets. Nayeli's eyes locked onto Jack's with a cold intensity. The warmth they once held, now buried beneath layers of distrust and unspoken resentments. The silence between them stretched painfully, weighed down by the ghosts of choices made and lives forever altered. Yet beneath the frost, there simmered a current of something neither dared voice, a fragile thread of loyalty that one time had defied blood and war. What took you so long? Nayeli's voice was rough, words carved from bitter years. You left me to rot while the world turned its back. Jack's jaw tightened. I never left, not truly. I carried your memory every day, the promise we made. His gaze fell to the leather pouch at his side, the worn emblem nestled safely inside, a relic of hope and burden alike. The warrior's gaze flickered toward the pouch, fingers twitching involuntarily, a shadow crossing his face. That token. It holds truths better left unspoken. Nayeli's voice dropped to a whisper now, almost a confession. There are things you don't understand, Jack, things that could unravel everything. Jack swallowed the lump churning in his throat, tension knotting his shoulders. Then tell me, I didn't come all this way to stand in silence. Before Nayeli could respond, a faint, unsettling sound sliced through the stillness, a subtle stir of hooves against the parched earth. Both men turned sharply, eyes searching. The shadows beyond the sparse scrub. The mysterious rider appeared, the same cloaked figure that had haunted Jack's return. now emerging from the twilight like a ghost summoned by fate. His presence was a pulse of cold air, his silhouette etched sharp against the darkening sky. Without a word, the rider dismounted slowly, each movement deliberate and laced with menace. His fingers brushed the hilt of a hidden weapon, eyes hidden beneath the cowl, flickering with a merciless flame. The silver insignia gleamed in the fading light, a silent but deadly proclamation. This was no ordinary visitor. This was a reckoning. Jack stepped protectively beside Nayeli, fists clenched. "We don't want your fight," he said steadily, voice like tempered steel. The rider's laugh was low, humorless. "This fight chose you long before you came looking." Nayeli's expression darkened, ancient wounds surfacing beneath sharp lines. "You don't have to do this," he warned quietly. "There's a truth buried beneath all this blood, one that could tear us apart or force us to unite." The rider's cold gaze flicked between them. "The peace you speak of, shattered decades ago when treachery poisoned the land. Pain isn't forgotten, Nayeli. It festers." Jack's heart hammered in his chest. The fragile ground beneath years of silence crumbled, and he understood the duel was more than a battle of guns. It was a clash of legacies, blood debts, and buried betrayals that could shatter the last fragile threads between settlers and tribe. The rider stepped forward, drawing a blade that caught the lingering glow from the sinking sun, its edge gleaming with cold promise. The desert air thickened like suffocating silk, and time seemed to slow. Nayeli rose, his own hand hovering near a blade concealed beneath his worn leather jacket. The years of hardship had sharpened him, no longer the vulnerable warrior Jack had known, but a ghost of vengeance and survival. Jack's pulse accelerated, the instinct to intervene torn between respect for Nayeli's fight and the terror of what this could unleash. "Enough!" Jack's voice cracked like a whip through the tense stillness. "You both risk everything on a silent duel that solves nothing." The rider's eyes locked deadly on Jack. "Step aside, or be swept away by what's coming." Nayeli's gaze flickered to Jack, conflict flashing in its depths. A war between old wounds and the man who had saved his life. Jack took one firm step forward, hands raised in uneasy peace. "We face this night together, or not at all." For a heartbeat, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the rider sheathed his blade. With a deliberate slowness, but dark, unreadable expression veiling his face. The tension cracked like a thunderclap in the looming dusk, binding the trio to the weight of a shared destiny. From the shadowed horizon, the wind carried a whispered threat, a promise of storms yet to come, of reckoning of blood and truth. Jack's fingers curled tighter around the leather pouch at his side, the worn fabric digging into his palm, a stark reminder that the past was no longer a distant memory to escape, but a living force demanding confrontation. The silent duel was postponed, but the shadow of the rider's challenge lingered, heavy and unyielding. Night fell over the arid expanse, swallowing the three men and the secrets they guarded. And as the first stars shivered into the vast sky, The rider's cold voice echoed one final challenge. Tomorrow, this land will run red, or the truth will burn in flames. The desert held its breath. The battle for all they carried, honor, truth, and survival, was only just beginning. Under the bruised sky of twilight, the uneasy alliance between Jack, Nayeli, and Taina coalesced into a tentative plan, a fragile thread against the gathering storm. The air around them was thick with whispered secrets and the weight of unspoken fears, pressing heavily against the barren land where old wounds refused to heal. Jack's gaze was steady but wary as he leaned toward Nayeli, the man who bore the invisible scars of exile and betrayal. "We have to confront this rider, not just for ourselves," Jack said, voice low yet resolute, "but for all who still walk these lands hoping for peace. Whatever he chases, it's tied to you, to your lineage." Nayeli's eyes, flickering like dying coals, met Jack's with a reluctant acknowledgement. "My past is not just history, but a weapon others seek to wield," he replied, voice rough with years of battle and loss. "If they claim what I carry, it could tip the balance of power and drown this land in fire." Taina stepped closer, the strength in her posture belied by the weariness behind her steady stare. "The rider and his men are shadows cast by broken promises, loyal to a dark cause that believes in destruction over reconciliation. We stand against more than just a man. This is a war for a legacy, for the future itself." The three shared a heavy silence, each acutely aware of the stakes tightening like a noose around their collective throats. The sun's last embers bled out over the horizon, casting lengthening shadows that flickered like ghosts of battles past. Jack's hand met the leather pouch at his side, a worn, sacred token Nayeli had entrusted him decades ago, now balm and burden intertwined. The weight of it grounded him, a steadfast reminder of the fragile hope they still clung to. "It's time," Jack said, breath steady, though the tremor of anticipation raced beneath his skin. "We lure the rider in, turn his hunger against him. If we can cripple this vendetta here, we might buy ourselves some time." Taina nodded solemnly. "His arrogance will be his downfall, but we must be ready. This is no simple trap. His men know these lands like the backs of their rifles." The plan was drawn quickly. Bait the rider with a false trail, maneuver him into the cramped ravines, where his numbers counted for less, and then strike, swift and decisive. As twilight deepened into night, the trio moved with cautious precision, footsteps muffled by the shifting sands. The desert, once a silent witness to youthful bravery and quiet promises, now held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. From the ridge above, the rider watched, a shadow cloaked in darkness, eyes gleaming cold and calculating. His broad shoulders were rigid beneath the heavy cloak. His horse shifted restlessly, nostrils flaring as if sensing the tightening snare. Beneath the black sky studded with stars indifferent to human strife, Jack's heart hammered against the stillness. The rider's insignia glittered faintly in the moonlight, a silent herald of impending doom. They set their trap along an abandoned cattle trail, narrow and surrounded by jagged outcrops that hid their movements. Taina's voice was a whisper among the whistling winds. "He'll take the bait. They always do." Hours passed with torturous slowness as they waited, shadows stretching long and thin across the cracked earth. The tension was a living thing, visible in the tight line of Jack's jaw, in the watchful glint in Nayeli's eyes, in the restless fingers clenching close to hidden weapons. Suddenly, the tranquility shattered. The faint clip-clop of hooves echoed through the stillness like an omen. Dust roused, floating like ash, suspended in the air, as the rider's silhouette emerged, deliberate and unyielding. Jack's breath caught, as the rider's men revealed themselves with chilling silence from the rocky perimeters, their guns gleaming coldly in the muted light. The ambush was underway, but instead of despair, a fierce determination lit Jack's soul. This was the crucible wherein shadows met fire, where old grudges would be tested against newfound resolve. The fight unfolded as a desperate ballet. Gunfire punctuated the night's heavy silence. Dust and echoes mingled with fierce shouts, the sharp scent of gunpowder masking the desert's usual decay. Jack moved through the chaos with practiced precision, his world narrowing to the rhythm of survival. Tanya was a storm, her tomahawk flashing in brutal arcs. Nayeli was a ghost of vengeance, swift and unforgiving. Yet, amid the fury, Jack's eyes caught a dark betrayal, a merciless gaze among the rider's ranks that stirred unease deep within him. The rider himself was a phantom at the center, orchestrating carnage with cold efficiency. His silver insignia gleamed mockingly, a constant reminder of the stakes and the debts long overdue. As bullets tore through the night and men crashed to the dust, the fragile remnants of trust and alliance stood firm, unyielding against the tide of hatred and blood. Finally, the assault faltered. The rider's men began to retreat into the darkness from which they came, leaving behind the wounded and the silence of near death. Breathing hard, Jack brushed dust from his coat and scanned the faces of his allies and foes alike, weariness etched deep, but eyes alight with the unbroken fire of defiance. Yet the threat hung palpably, the knowledge that the rider was no mere pawn, but a deeper enemy, entwined in shadows darker than any gunfight. And then, amidst the settling dust and the fading echoes of gunfire, Jack's gaze caught the betraying truth. The rider had not come alone, nor without cunning. One among the rider's own was a ghost from the past, an ally turned betrayer. The revelation crashed over Jack like a thunderclap. The broken path of loyalty and blood, spilled across the desert, now bore a new wound, one deeper and more dangerous than any they had yet faced. This alliance, forged in desperation, would have to face not only the outward enemy, but the enemy within. And as the night swallowed the battleground, the seed of doubt took root, threatening to unravel them all in the chapters still to come. Jack's boots whispered against the cracked earth as he moved alongside Tana, both wary shadows slithing through the fading light of day. The dry wind twisted around them, a restless breath that carried the scent of sage and the memory of old wounds. Tana's eyes never lost their sharp edge, scanning the horizon and the thorny silhouettes of mesquite bushes with quiet caution. "The rider hasn't given up," she said low, her voice threading through the evening air like a steady drumbeat. "He hunts with patience, always watchful. We're marked. Jack's fingers tightened around the worn leather pouch hidden beneath his coat, feeling the roughened fabric bite into his palm. Inside was the emblem Nayeli had entrusted to him so long ago. More than a token, a tether to the past that now pressed against his chest like a living weight. His mind drifted involuntarily to the boy, who had stretched trembling hands toward a bleeding warrior on scorched earth, had lifted him from death's door while fear screamed in his small throat. That desperate act had forged an unspoken bond that neither time nor silence had broken. The dusk deepened, shifting shadows into pools of ink, and distant silhouettes shifted among the rocky ridges, the glint of steel flashing briefly before vanishing again. Jack's pulse quickened. The rider was closer than ever, stalking from ridge to ridge, watching, waiting. "They don't just watch for show," Tana murmured. "They move with deadly intent. The rider's men know this land as well as the wind." A rustle, soft and sharp as a whispered warning, split the tense quiet. Tana's hand went instinctively to her tomahawk. Jack's breath caught. Figures suddenly emerged from behind twisted shadows. Two men, faces obscured beneath wide hats, their fingers twitching near gun grips. Eyes cold, unforgiving, as seasoned as the desert sun was cruel. Jack swallowed the knot rising in his throat. The past was no longer a distant memory. It was a snare, tightening with cruel precision. These were no random pursuers. This was the deadly reach of a vendetta, etched deep in blood and lost trust. "We can't run," Jack whispered. "They want the secret we carry, the token Nayeli gave me, more than memory." Tana nodded solemnly. "The rider's hatred is older than this dust, burning, endless. We move carefully, but their trap waits around the next bend." The narrow canyon ahead yawned like a gaping maw, jagged rocks casting long shadows that clawed at the earth. It was the perfect place for an ambush, a killing ground carefully chosen by enemies who thrived in silence and surprise. Jack's fingers brushed the pouch again, the edges biting into his skin, anchoring him to what he must protect. From the ridge above, the rider watched, the heavy cloak masking his features, but revealing the unmistakable glint of the silver insignia. A silent oath sworn in shadow. His horse shifted, nostrils flaring in the dry, gasping air. A wind stirred the dust at Jack's feet as something slipped from the rider's cloak. A folded note, fluttering like a wounded bird onto the cracked ground. Jack's heart thumped as he stooped, unfolding the parchment with trembling hands. The message was a dark promise, ink bleeding like a scream across the paper. "Everything you built will burn unless you surrender the past." Tana's voice was a steady anchor against the rising storm. "They want to break us, to erase every link to Nayeli." Jack's gaze hardened, eyes burning with defiance. "Then we'll show them those bonds are forged in fire." His voice was low, a vow woven from years of silence and unyielding loyalty. Without warning, a sharp crack shattered the night's brittle calm. A gunshot tore through the canyon like thunder. Gravel scattered as they dove for cover behind jagged stones. Hearts pounding, a desperate rhythm of survival. Figures burst from the shadows, weapons raised, faces etched with merciless intent. Bullets sprayed like deadly rain, stirring clouds of dust that cloaked the furious dance of battle. Jack moved with deadly purpose, every step a calculated gamble. Tanya was a whirlwind, her tomahawk gleaming as it swung with brutal precision. Nayeli's ghostly presence filled the space beside them, his every movement a pulse of ruthless grace earned through exile and pain. Amid the chaos, Jack's eyes caught a look, a cold, familiar gaze among the enemy ranks. Betrayal lurked here, deeper and darker than the open violence. One of the riders' own was a ghost from the past, a traitor cloaked in loyalty. The volley of gunfire ebbed as ambushers fell back into the shadows. The canyon swallowed the echoes, leaving only the ragged breaths and pounding hearts of those left standing. Tina exhaled sharply. We escaped, for now. Jack scanned the darkening trail ahead, muscles aching but resolve unbroken. The rider's shadow fell heavily behind them, a storm gathering with merciless patience. The folded note's threat echoed in his mind. The past was a wildfire, spreading fast, ready to consume everything he had fought for. They were caught in a deadly game, players forced to move before the trap snapped shut. Somewhere beyond the encroaching darkness, the riders' plans unfolded in quiet menace, waiting to crush them beneath the weight of old grudges and buried truths. The fragile hope carried in that worn pouch was a light in the growing night, a light they would need to hold fast. The harsh desert wind whispered its warning as night deepened. The next move would be theirs, if they survived to make it. The burning horizon cast long, trembling shadows as Jack, Nayeli, and Tanya stood side by side atop the ridge overlooking the barren valley below. The air was thick with charged silence, carrying the weight of decades in its stillness. The rider and his men were out there, weaving through the rocky passes, their dark shape a promise of reckoning. Tonight, everything would be decided. Jack's fingers brushed the worn leather. Pouch at his side, the sacred token entrusted by Nayeli so many years ago. It was more than a keepsake. It was the fragile hope tethering them to a future beyond vengeance. He swallowed the knot in his throat and met the tired eyes of the warrior, who had been both his salvation and his haunting past. We face this storm together, Jack said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. No more ghosts between us. Nayeli nodded slowly, the hard lines etched by suffering softening for a fleeting moment. Tana's gaze sharpened as she scanned the horizon, searching the dust clouds, stirring like a warning. The ambush was ready. Their plan was simple. Draw the rider out into the narrow ravines where his numbers counted for less, where their knowledge of the land could turn the tide. The desert held its breath as the first echoes of distant hooves pricked the night air. From the shadows came the rider, his cloak billowing like a dark banner, the silver insignia flashing cold and untouchable beneath the moonlight. His eyes glowed with the cruel fire of a decades-old vendetta, a ghost consumed by the weight of betrayal and the thirst for retribution. Jack stepped forward, the pouch burning against his ribs. "This ends tonight," he declared. "We're not afraid to face the truth you've chased all these years." A humorless smile stretched across the rider's hidden face. Truths buried in blood are the hardest to face, and the most deadly. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the silence, sharp, relentless. The riders' men surged from their hiding places, weapons raised, eyes unforgiving. The narrow canyon exploded into chaos as bullets cut through the night, dust swirling in vicious clouds. Jack ducked behind a fractured boulder, heart pounding. Taina was a storm unleashed, her tomahawk gleaming as it sang death with swift precision. Nayeli moved like a vengeful shade, every strike a testament to years of exile and survival. Amid the melee, Jack caught sight of a familiar figure, a betrayer concealed among the riders' ranks, an old ally turned foe. A stab of grief and fury pierced him. The enemy was no longer just outside, but within their fragile alliance. "Hold your ground," Taina snapped, fierce and commanding. "This fight is for every secret we carry." The battle wore into the hours, a brutal dance between light and shadow, between desperation and hope. Slowly, their fire and will pushed the attackers back, forcing them to retreat into the darkness from which they had emerged. Breathing hard, Jack surveyed the broken ground and weary faces around him. The riders' forces scattered, but the cold truth lingered. Their enemy was not finished. Then, a sudden movement caught Nayeli's eye. From the shadows stepped the rider himself, a lone figure holding the cold finality of the fight in his gaze. "Time to settle what was left undone," the rider said, voice low, laced with bitter resolve. Jack squared his shoulders and stepped before Nayeli, shielding the friend whose scars told a story the world refused to hear. "No more bloodshed between us. We face this as brothers, or not at all." The rider's gaze flickered to Jack's unyielding eyes, a flash of something unreadable stirring beneath the surface. Then, with a sharp gesture, the tension shattered. He sheathed a hidden blade with a swift motion, as if acknowledging an invisible, desperate truce. "The past dies here," the rider whispered. "But the future, this land's future, is yours if you can bear this." Weight of its secrets. Jack exhaled, the heavy night air, tasting like freedom laced with sorrow. Nayeli's steady nod was a silent acceptance that their battle had not merely been over survival, but redemption. Taina stepped forward, eyes blazing with hard-won hope. "We guard this land now, not with hate, but with truth." The three stood under the vast, indifferent sky as the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pale fire. The desert, relentless yet wise, seemed to exhale a long-held breath, sweeping away the dust and ghosts. Jack felt the weight of years lift slightly from his shoulders, replaced by the solemn burden of responsibility. The token nestled at his side pulsed not with fear or secret, but with a quiet promise. He looked to Nayeli and Taina, friends, guardians, echoes of a bond forged in the harshest fires. "This ground is ours, to protect, not with guns or grudges, but with understanding." Together, they watched the sun rise over the endless plains, painting the land with light that spoke of beginnings. The shadows of the past remained, but now they were tempered by the strength of connection and hope that outlasted bloodshed. The boy who saved an Apache's life had returned, and with him came a new story, not of vengeance, but of peace. The horizon held the promise of uncertain days, but also the endless possibility of change. And in this moment, beneath the endless sky, the frontier was no longer just a place of wounds, but of healing. The chapter closed on their united silhouette, the guardians of a land scarred but not forsaken, standing watch over a future they would shape together. The past had met its reckoning. Now, the dawn belonged to them all.